city with traditional Southern values.
I underestimated how far he was going to go. What he was willing to do.
This is a city that survived the War of 1812, the Civil War, and God knows how many hurricanes. But when Lincoln Clay went after the mob, he inflicted more damage than all the wars and hurricanes combined.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming along. My name is Matt Bauer. I'm the audio director for Hangar 13. We are a studio within 2K Games, head by Hayden Blackman. Our audio team consists of myself, 2 junior sound designers, 2 senior sound designers. Our engineering needs kind of fluctuated up and down a little bit, from 1 person part-time to 3 people, and some really great external contractors that we worked with. If you're not familiar with the game Mafia 3, I'll just walk you through it very briefly. It's an open-world, third-person cover shooter. It's set in the town of New Bordeaux. That's our fictionalized version of New Orleans in 1968. It's the story of Lincoln Clay. He is a man of mixed race. He's an orphan. He's a Vietnam vet, and he's returned home from the war to find that his surrogate family, the black mob, are deeply indebted to the Italian mob. And throughout a period of time, his family is basically slaughtered by the Italian mob, and he goes on this sort of quest for revenge. It's important to note that even though this is an established franchise for 2K, Mafia 1 and 2 were built by our studio in the Czech Republic. This is the first project that Hangar 13 dev team took on. So we were building a brand new team, a brand new engine, and an open world game all at the same time. If you're not familiar with the game, I'm just going to show you a really quick 2-minute clip that just kind of quickly encapsulates a little bit of the story of what's going on.
Damn it! You triggered the fucking alarm! Get on it!
Everybody all right? That was the craziest fucking thing I've ever saw.
Why don't you get us something off the top shelf? We need to celebrate!
I gotta tell you that.
Fill me up. You know something, Lincoln? You're possibly the baddest motherfucker I ever laid my eyes on. You shouldn't have said no.
Where the fuck you think you're going? Let it keep going, you got 9 more!
I forgot to mention it's a violent game. There's a little bit of language in there. So what to expect over the next hour? I'm going to walk you through how we attempted to deliver period-authentic vehicle audio in a large open-world environment. Some of the things we learned along the way. I'm going to do a pretty deep dive into the recording techniques we did for cars, trucks, boats, and tires, and touch on some of the implementation methods that we chose. Simple stats about the game. I'll just run through this really quick. There were 90-plus vehicles, 40-plus weapons, about 10 districts, 10 full suburbs we had to build, a little over 4 hours of cinematic material. We had a licensed soundtrack of about 106 songs, original composed score, 3 full radio stations, complete with commercials, news, all that kind of stuff. We were about 500,000 lines of dialogue, once localized. We used WIs inside of our own proprietary engine. We mixed in 7.1. And our audio budget kind of peaked out at around 75% of 1 core and around 206 meg. On average, we were a little bit less than that, but that's kind of where we peaked. So really early in development, what we knew was that the time period was going to be 1968, and I needed to find cars from 68 and about 30 years earlier than that And when I knew I needed classic American and European cars, I needed trucks, boats, and we had to service about 90 fictional vehicles in the game. Our goals were to deliver authenticity. Actually, these first two goals really came from kind of studio pillars. One was to always remind the player that they were in New Orleans in 1968, so we wanted to always convey a sense of time and place and authenticity. But then at the same time, we had this other goal, which was to deliver this Hollywood action driving, which basically meant excitement versus simulation. So immediately there's a contradiction between being authentic and being over the top, and we had to kind of draw a line there. We always wanted to immerse the player into the car, and we did that through radio stations, the vehicle interacting with the environment, all sorts of environmental changes when you're in the vehicle. And we knew we wanted to provide a big variety. All the cars in our game were fictional makes and models, so we had a little bit of freedom there. Our recording goals were really simple. Safety first, don't be stupid. Try not to break shit. Capture great sound, and then if we had time, take some photos and video while we were there. And I'll show you a few of those recording sessions throughout the next hour. So how do we find these cars? We started by trying to plug into the local community, so we started going to classic car shows, and we ended up partnering with a car club who wasn't really tied to one particular brand. It wasn't like the Corvette Club or the Mustang Club. It was just this local club of about 650 members, and they had everything from old cars to new cars, fast cars, slow cars, and they ended up being kind of an agent that would help us find all the different cars we wanted. We had friends make suggestions. We ended up working with a truck service center just north of here in Greenbrae, a marine service center in Sausalito, and we also went to a supercharger factory down in Southern California. So some of the challenges of scale. We knew it was going to be time and cost prohibitive to record 90 unique vehicles. So we decided to just find the most diverse group of engines that we possibly could. We needed a mixture of some regular cars and some high-performance cars, and we had to figure out how and where we were going to do this. And I had these really early goals of, I love racing games, and I wanted to be as detailed and as amazing as some of these really great racing games that I love to play. And really quickly, reality set in that, this is just one slice of a much bigger pie. It's an open world game. It's not purely a racing game. And, we had to think about our allocation of resources, not just memory and CPU, but how much time we could devote to this, and of course, the cost. So, even though it was a smaller part of a much bigger game, our goal was always to try and reach to be as good as possible or as close to these really amazing racing games that I love to play. Our final count ended at 30 recording sessions, which was 20 cars, 2 trucks, 7 boats, 1 electric car, and now we're actively recording new cars for our DLC packs. When it comes to recording a car or any type of engine, there's a whole number of different ways you can go. And I'm not going to claim that our method was better or worse than anyone else's. I'm just going to walk you through some of those different methods you can choose from. You can go out on an open track or an open road. You can use a roller dynamometer, or you can use a hydraulic dynamometer, which I'll go into a little more detail. And each one of those has unique challenges and advantages and disadvantages. And there's probably other methods out there. These are just the 4 that I was really familiar with. What we chose to do was use a Dynapack for our cars. We took our tires to a racetrack. We did our trucks out on the open road, and then boats we recorded both in water and on dry land. And I'll go into more detail on that in a moment. So if you're not familiar, what's a dyno? A dyno is basically a treadmill that lets you put your car on it and drive the car at any speed you want while it's not moving. And it's something that allows a mechanic to tune the car, measure the performance of the car, and basically, change the performance of a car at all different speeds while it's stationary. So why choose a dyno? It would be so much more fun to get out on a racetrack and thrash around in these cars. Why do this method? For us, it was a few things. It was really a matter of safety. We're dealing with old cars that are 45 to 75 years old. I don't know how reliable they are. I don't know if the brakes work. I don't know if the steering works. I don't really want to put my team members in these cars and send them off at high speed down a racetrack. But it also provides a really controlled recording environment. We minimize the risk of damage to these cars, and we have this kind of hands-off miking approach. When I started speaking to some of the vehicle owners, they got really concerned. They imagined us driving around a racetrack with all sorts of stuff clamped and taped to the side of their cars. And these are old show cars with beautiful paint jobs, and they take them to displays, but they don't really want to push them that hard. So when we started suggesting this as a method to record, we earned their trust much more easily, and they were willing to work with us. because it was a much more hands-off approach, much more controlled environment. The downside of recording with a dyno is that it can be kind of too clinical. Sometimes you lose some of that great character of an engine. And you also have a lot of overheating risks. When you're in a controlled room like that, you have to put really large fans in the front of the engine to bring airflow in and exhaust fans at the back to pull the exhaust out. And we don't want that for recording, so we would record with the fans off, which meant we had to be really, really careful to not overheat the cars. Here's a picture of the dyno we used with a 1940s Plymouth. So there's two different types of dynos that at least I'm aware of. There's a traditional roller dyno, which is really quick. It's really easy. You just drive the car straight on. It works with almost any type of car, and it's really common, easy to find. The downside is that the rollers themselves produce so much noise that it kind of makes it impractical for recording. There's also a slight safety risk in that there's a lot of inertia involved in the car, and it can brake and launch forward into the wall. But really, the biggest downside for us is the noise. It just ruins the recording. So if you use a Dynapack, which is a brand developed in New Zealand, it's basically a hydraulic brake. You take the wheels off the car, you bolt this machine directly onto the wheels, and it's a computer-controlled brake that dials up the resistance and the load on the engine. The big bonus is that it's practically silent. It makes no noise at all. It's really accurate, because we're working with old cars where the gauges probably aren't really that accurate. And it's really safe. There's no inertia. There's no chance the car can brake and launch forward. The downside to it is that they're really rare. They're hard to find. And you usually have to work with a high-performance workshop that's really expensive. It takes a lot longer to put the car on and off the dyno. You have to basically jack it up and take the wheels off, so there's more time invested. And one of the other downsides is that there's certain cars it just won't work with. You know, if you have side exhaust pipes or really wide fenders or non-standard wheel types, chances are you can't put the car on the dyno. And the little side story about this car on the lower left here, this is a late 1960s Can-Am McLaren race car. When all said and done, it's about $800,000. The thing had just been rebuilt from head to toe, and the owner agreed to let us record it. But we had a 48-hour window that we had to record it before he was going to ship it off to a race. So we found a machine shop that basically built us custom adapters within 2 days so that we could stick this machine on the dyno and capture it. It was an 8-litre, 800 horsepower V8. It's the loudest car I've ever heard. If you can imagine a lion right here kind of roaring at you, that's what this thing sounded like. So there's a picture of that car on the dyno with the body removed, and you can kind of see where we had custom adapters to fit it in. That was one of those cars where your ears ring for 3 days, even with hearing protection. So a typical schedule. Through a little trial and error, we worked out we could record about 3 cars in one day. It was a pretty long day, but it basically took us an hour to set up, 30 minutes to pack up. It's really important to note that before we turn the key on any car, myself, the vehicle owner, and the dyno technician would have a quick conversation, and we'd talk about the limitations of the car, the RPM ranges that they're comfortable with, the temperature ranges that they're comfortable with, and basically just let them know that we were going to respect their property and we weren't going to be irresponsible with it. And then the owner was really comfortable in letting us do what we wanted to do. It took up to an hour to mount the car and up to half an hour to dismount the car. The recording itself was quite easy. It took us less than an hour per car. And then we'd do a Foley session with each car afterwards. So some of the limitations we ran into was that we're dealing with old cars that have various levels of reliability. Their cooling systems are nowhere near as efficient as modern cars. Some of them just can't do what you want them to do. We had one car that couldn't rev more than about 2,500 RPM. This car that's in the picture here, this is a 1930s American Bantam. For anyone who's familiar with engines, it's a 2.8-litre V8 with a flat head, supercharger, and dual Webers. And it's a really inefficient cooling type car. So this car, we could record for 12 seconds, and then it would overheat, and we'd have to stop for 10 minutes. And then we could record for 12 seconds, and then stop for 10 minutes. But it sounded so amazing, it was worth it. At the other end of the spectrum, we had a European car whose name I'm not allowed to mention, but they're Italian, and they like red. And the owner of that car basically said, you can do whatever this thing lets you do. Push it to 8,500 RPM if you want. And we did, and it sounded fantastic. One of the things we learned that regular cars just sound kind of boring. We had this idea of not everyone in the city owns a hot rod, so we have to have this mixture of regular and high-performance cars. And the regular cars just sounded more boring than we thought they would. So I think for future, we will always go with slightly modified and heavily modified cars. And then the really obvious one was that anything with a rear engine was going to be really difficult to get a separation of engine and exhaust. So specifically, some of the things that went wrong, we had some cars with starter motor issues. One car had a carburetor issue, 2 overheated. We had some cars that didn't show up on brief. They had different wheels and different exhaust pipes. We even had some car owners who, they had these really beautiful show cars and they wouldn't drive them if it was a wet road the day after raining. So the key there is really to have backups planned, before your recording session. So now we know what we're going to record, where we're going to record, and how we're going to record. But now we get down to the meat and potatoes of what we're actually going to capture. We decided to do, engine start, stop, false start, idle, rev blips. We do ramp runs, which is basically getting the car from idle all the way to maximum RPM, and we would do that fast and slow. And that was mainly as a reference, so we could hear what the car should sound like as it's accelerating and decelerating. We decided to record loops of about 6 seconds, which we didn't need that much, but it was just enough for us to work with. And we would put a really high load on the engine, and we'd do a really fine level of loops, 200 RPM increments all the way up to 2000, and then 500 RPM increments up to redline. And then we'd repeat that whole process under a low load. Our goal was to get 3 perspectives. We wanted the engine, the exhaust, and the interior. And then afterwards, when one car was finished, we'd take it to another location and do a Foley session of everything that opened and closed and clinked and clunked while we started preparing the next car. The gear we used, I won't run through this in high detail, but basically it was an 8-channel sound devices unit. If I could only choose one microphone for vehicle recordings, it would be the DPA 4060s. They were reliable in every single situation and really versatile, and if I could choose one mic, that would be it. I guess the other one to note is the AKG D112s, which are really designed for kick drums, but we used them on exhausts to get that really low rumble of the exhaust. And then over time, as we did these sessions, we expanded our kit. We were recording directly into Pro Tools through an interface at one point. We added a Zoom F8 so that we could slave the two together and get 16 channels. So over time, we kind of expanded our kit. Just really simple, extra common sense stuff to bring to a recording session. Bring cameras, bring first aid kits, spare cables and batteries of every kind. And probably the most important thing to note there is sandbags. The last thing I want to do is hang a boom over a $150,000 Porsche and then have the mic stand fall over and dent the car. So it's really important to get some really cheap sandbags and weight everything down. Some really common sense tips when you're recording cars. Confirm everything the day before. It's not as important to them to show up to your session as it is to you. Plan plenty of backup cars in case if you can. Be flexible. Some of these cars don't do what you want, so it's really important to adjust your priorities. And if a car is overheating, you may have to kind of decide what are the most important things that I need to record now and kind of change your plan around a little bit. And then just use whatever method is the easiest. It's really impractical to be typing into an iPad when you're moving on a boat at 90 miles an hour. So, use pen and paper, use laminated sheets, use whatever is really simple and just easy. And then the biggest takeaway here is investigate what your legal issues and permits and insurance needs are really far in advance. For our tire session, which I'll show you in a moment, we started working with our legal team maybe 3 months before the recording session. And their rules were really simple. Don't break the law, be safe and responsible. And everything from that they were willing to support us with. But sometimes that can take a really long time to prepare. We had to prepare nearly 3 months in advance for that recording session. So where to place the mic? Well, this is as open a question as any. It's all down to choice. For an 8-mic setup, we chose to put 3 in the engine bay, 4 on the exhaust for a dual exhaust system, and 1 on the interior. Over time, we expanded to a 16-mic setup, and that wasn't really because we needed more coverage of the car. It was just because we were getting different tonalities from different mics, and on some of those really expensive rare cars, we just wanted to have backup channels as well. But specifically, we would put the DPA labs inside the engine bay, and usually we would put one close to the intake to get that kind of sucking air sound, and then we'd look for something else that was unique and different inside the engine. And sometimes that was down at the back firewall, sometimes it was underneath the engine near the exhaust manifold. It was basically just looking for something that was different and unique about that engine. And then we would have one mic a few feet back from the engine to just get an overall picture. And we would put 2 shotguns at the back of the exhaust, and then the 2 AKG D112s to get the low rumble of the exhaust. And then usually just one mic on the interior down where the passenger's feet would go. And I'll show you a video of the cars sort of towards the end. When it comes to trucks, it's an entirely different beast. The challenges we had was being able to record them in isolation. We couldn't find a dyno for trucks. So we ended up recording them out on the open road. We did 1 day per truck, just by myself. And the most important thing is a highly skilled driver is more important than the truck itself. And I'll get into that in a moment. Trucks are really hot engines, and I was really worried about these really thin mic cables just melting in 5 minutes. So what I ended up doing was going to a hardware store and buying a dishwasher hose. It was really cheap. It was a way to run all the mic cables through and insulate them, and we were able to do these sessions without damaging anything. The truck itself is a big clunky machine, and so you try and use the body of the truck to build natural windbreaks, and I'll show you a picture of that. Here you can see kind of towards the back of the truck, we used the frame to position our mics, and we wrapped them in foam and tried to use the cabin of the truck to protect us from the wind. The real challenge was recording steady states out on a road. So what we did, we had this really skilled driver who went all up through the hills of Marin Headlands, and he knew exactly which road to be on to be the right gradient of hill with the right amount of load on the engine and the right gear so that he could hold the truck really steady under load and let us get a usable loop. And then we did the whole process again by adding weight to the truck, and he added the trailer. And with the truck, the one characteristic that I really wanted to capture is called the Jake brake. It's an exhaust system. I don't know if you hear trucks go downhill and they kind of make that bop, 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 bop sound that some people don't like. That's a valve that uses the truck's pressure to help slow it down, and that was something we really wanted to capture and use in the game. I'd like to play you just a really quick sample of how our final results of our trucks ended up in the game. This runs for about a minute and a half. So when it came to boats, again, that was an entirely different process. We did a 3-day recording session to capture 7 different boat engines, and again, early on in the process, we didn't know exactly what the final art models would be, but we knew we had to provide small fishing boats, medium boats, some sort of high-speed drug smuggling boat, some sort of large police patrol or Coast Guard boat, and then the kind of bayou swamp fan boat. What we found was that the really small, less than 10 horsepower engines, it's really easy to record them in a tank. We found that being out on the water wasn't so difficult for us to maintain steady RPM states. If you can go out on a smooth, calm, nice weather day, that really helps compared to choppy weather. And one thing we learnt was that the exhaust of most boats is submerged under the water, so it really offers you nothing to record other than that slight kind of glug, glug, glug sound when you're at idle. So what we decided to do was record a second pass of each boat on dry land. And what you can do is connect, the boats need water for cooling, but you can connect the hose to the engine, and then you can record a second pass to get that exhaust and get that really aggressive bite that we wanted from the boats. And then we blended those recordings together. What we decided to do was take the engine covers off, put the DPAs under the engine. We knew that the blimps and shotgun mics were going to, at some level, they were going to work for low speeds, and then at higher speeds, they were going to become useless. So having those DPA mics under the engine covers, we had a natural windbreak, and it didn't matter what speed, what RPM we were at, we knew we would get some clean, reliable recordings from them. I had this growing concern that, you know, salt water and microphones don't mix. And we could have very easily just destroyed all our gear in one day. And we knew everything was going to get really wet. So I decided to go to one of those like fabric stores where they sell sewing material, and I said, do you guys sell anything, any kind of waterproof fabric that I could buy? And they said, yeah, sure, this is our baby diaper section. You can have camouflage, or you can have this. And I thought about it for a while, and we went with the camouflage. But we basically bought this fabric, wrapped up the mics, sprayed them with that Scotchgard stuff that's great for your shoes, and made sure we kind of pointed the back of the mic into the wind. And you know, these things got soaked every single day, but we were able to protect, you know, for maybe $30 worth of extra materials, we were able to protect all our gear and not break anything. So that was really worthwhile. And then we used a contact mic on the hull of the boat to get all the thumps and bumps. What I'd like to show you is just a really quick video of the recording session, and then one more quick video of how those boats ended up in game. That was a really, really fun day. Here's a little quick sample of how some of those sounds got used in-game. What you'll hear is more of the water spray, more of the thumps and bumps, and some of the different things we did. On the fan boat, you'll hear that we added, you know, vibrations for rudder control, all that kind of stuff. So here's an example of how our final boat audio ended up in-game. Some of the additional pieces that we added to the engine, our designers wanted to add forced induction, superchargers and turbochargers, and the difficult part about recording a supercharger is that the engine that is underneath it, of course, is going to be loud. So we contacted a factory that makes superchargers down in Southern California, and by total luck, they have a completely soundproof room in their factory where they spool these up on electric motors and test them and make sure that they're working properly before they package them off to their customers. It was, I couldn't have been more lucky with the conditions, and they agreed to let us in there, so we recorded that way. The turbo was a little more difficult. We couldn't find a similar situation, so it became a combination of real turbos, sound design, and Foley. You know, we used ball bearing keychains, compressed air, hospital defibrillators, and all sorts of different things to make our turbo sounds. With the police sirens, we also had a real hard time finding a car with a 1960s siren. It was early 60s where they started experimenting with electronic sirens and went away from the old rotating impeller type sirens. So we ended up going to eBay and just buying a siren, and that's how we managed to capture that. We also found that a lot of the sounds from a 1960s police siren is due to the police officers messing with the buttons and kind of moving the siren halfway between two different positions and kind of messing with it that way. So that was something we really wanted to capture and recreate. Brings me to tires. This was also one of the most fun parts of the whole project for us. You know, our goals were to capture a clean set of tire sounds in isolation from an engine. We wanted to capture multiple different surfaces, including a wet road, and then share that same recording across all vehicles in the game. You know, the challenge really was preparation. You know, we looked at a whole bunch of different options of how to do this. You know, we knew that by using an electric car, that would provide us a quiet engine, and you know, there was only really one model of electric car that had enough horsepower to do what we wanted. We looked at private racetracks, runways, commercial racetracks, and for all different reasons, it wasn't really a great option for us. You know, some people declined to record with us. There was a commercial racetrack really close to our office, but they have a go-kart track and a drag racing strip, and we really couldn't get a private, quiet place to record. We could, but it would have been really expensive to rent out the entire facility. So what we settled on was Laguna Seca Mazda Raceway down in Monterey. It's about 2 hours south of here. The reason for Laguna Seca was it was really reasonably priced. If I want the racetrack, it's about $15,000 a day, but the skid pad area is only $1,000 per day. It's a really safe place. It's really away from any kind of main roads. It's not accessible to the public, and the skid pad area is enclosed and locked. And again, you know, speaking with our legal team, their rules were don't break the law, be safe and responsible. So that was kind of the mandate that I took when I was looking for this recording session. Where we really lucked out is that Laguna Seca is on county-owned land, and they have a noise ordinance where they're not allowed to reach a certain average noise level. So the way they counter that is they actually close a couple days per month and do no racing, and that brings their average noise level down for the month. So to our luck, they let us record on one of those no race days, and we actually got the entire facility to ourselves for $1,000. It was really terrific. We hired their lead driving instructor to be our driver. We had one technician to basically swap wheels on and off of the car. You know, we rented this car from a private owner, and you know, we bought our own tires and wheels so that we weren't destroying his tires out on the track. We had an ambulance on standby, which is really an inexpensive thing to do. And we had myself and one other sound designer and one producer. The whole session only ran one day. It was a really simple mic setup. We put 4 labs underneath each wheel, basically right at the very base there where you can kind of see the corner just before the wheels where we put our mics. And then we used these camera tripods called a cam tree gripper, which is basically this really flexible industrial suction mount system to hang a couple of Sennheiser shotguns above the wheels. And then we would have the driver in the car, one person in the car, and then walkie-talkie communication to just let everyone know if everything's okay. What we decided to record was really steady driving in a straight line. You know, the kind of boring stuff was driving at 5 miles an hour, but we got this really nice grit from the tires, all the way up to about 70. We did light braking, but not actually skidding. We did braking where we were skidding. We drove around in circles and did, you know, light, medium, and heavy sideways drifting. And then we got to do the really fun stuff, which was, you know, pouring clouds of smoke off the car and getting the burnout sounds. 2 things that we learnt in our research prior we had to look at what type of tyres to purchase, and we spoke to some drifting professionals who told us that basically if we went with kind of the cheaper Korean tyres, we were going to get the best sound out of them. So that was great because it was cheap and it was what we wanted. And we also learned that the temperature of a tyre completely changes how it sounds. And this was something we didn't realize till we were on the track and the driver was explaining it to us. That squealing sound that you get from a tyre is actually when the rubber is cold and it's still making some grip and it's kind of losing its grip and making grip. And that's what produces that squealing sound. When a tyre gets so hot that it's starting to melt and turn soft, that sound disappears entirely and you get this really cool whizzing sound. And we were kind of fascinated by this, so we recorded it and I went back to our designers and said, is there any chance that you are simulating temperature? And he's like, yeah, of course. So we put that into the game, and in our game, as you're doing burnouts, over time that sound will change based on the temperature that's simulated of the tyre. And then we repeated the entire process. We wet down the road, did everything all over again, did it on dirt and gravel and a grass leaf combination. The two big challenges that we faced during this was, as we started to get into the really high speed, whipping around, doing burnouts, I was concerned that those suction mounts were going to fall off, and with the mic cable connected, the thing was going to swing around like a wrecking ball and destroy this $140,000 car. So I made a decision at some point to take those mics off and just go with the lavs under the wheels. And I was a little disappointed because they really were the two best mics we had, but in the nature of protecting and respecting this person's property, we decided to not do that. The other big challenge we had is traction control. This is a modern computer-controlled electric car. Even when you turn the traction control off, it still has a number of systems involved that are trying to save your life. And so if you are sliding out of control, it shuts the power down to the engine. And it was really restricting our driver from doing what he wanted to do. We knew about this early on, and luckily I had a friend that works at this company, and he told me which fuses and relays to pull out and rearrange to fool the car into doing what we wanted it to do. So we kind of lucked out there. But again, this came down to preparation. We planned this session 3 months in advance. So I had maybe 50 conversations with this engineer about everything I could learn about this car, about what it would do, what it wouldn't do, and what my limitations were going to be. I'll show you a real quick video of how some of those recording sessions went. I'm going to play this back just a little quieter, just to kind of protect everyone's ears, by the nature of this, how obnoxious this type of sound can be. It was a really fun day. We were really happy with the results. Everything turned out exactly as we'd planned. What I'd like to do is show you a really quick sample of how that sounds in-game with everything that we did after the fact. What you're going to hear in this video is just the road sounds. Everything else has been disabled. It's just purely the tires. And I forgot to mention, if the surrounds are working in here, what you're hearing in the quad speakers right now is a representation of each wheel in the game. Or each wheel on your car. I don't know if you guys noticed the whizzing sound that kind of comes in and out at different times. And the way we did the driving on the rims, I actually took a jack stand and just connected a contact mic to it and then pointed one other shotgun mic at it and just rubbed it on the concrete. And I was able to kind of create the loops that I wanted of different intensities and different speeds and kind of jiggled it on concrete. And that was a way to come up with that sound. When it came time to implementation, we were kind of at this real crossroads. Do we go with a loop-based system? Granular synthesis is a really popular method that a lot of people are choosing. We evaluated granular synthesis, and there was an off-the-shelf product we could buy, and there were some things we liked about it and some things we didn't like about it. I didn't have the engineering resources to go and create our own brand new granular synthesis system, so we ended up deciding to go with a very fine, detailed loop-based system for this game. That doesn't mean we won't evaluate that method again in future, and we are evaluating that for future, but for this game we decided to go with a really fine, detailed loop. Again, we were doing 200 RPM increments from idle to 2000, and then 500 RPM increments up to redline. Then we built everything we needed inside of Wwise with switches and blend containers and RTPCs. We ended up mixing everything down to a stereo engine, a stereo exhaust, and it turned out the interior perspective camera angle was going to be cut from the game, but at the time of recording we didn't know that, so we captured it anyway. We decided to keep the player's car completely 2D, even though it's a third-person game and the car is kind of out there in front of you. The camera moves around a lot, the car's spinning around a lot. Our camera had this really kind of chasing Dutch tilt kind of system going on, and it was really kind of distracting for the player to hear their engine moving around so much. So we decided to keep everything in 2D and then completely change the mix state based on the camera angle that the player chose. 3D cars, of course, NPC cars were, of course, 3D, and we had the original goal of keeping them just as high fidelity as everything else, and again, reality set in that we couldn't do that, so we ended up having to optimize them and ship them with a mono single engine exhaust combination. We had some performance concerns, and it was really more important to me to hear more cars at once on the road in a traffic situation than to just have 2 or 3 cars sound as high as fidelity as possible. So that was one of our limitations. With tires, we shared those recordings. We did a slight pitch shift based on the size of the car. So trucks, we would pitch down and get a deeper howl, and we'd pitch up for small cars. Each wheel was tracked independently in the game, so each wheel plays the appropriate surface that you're on. And then for NPCs, we optimized by playing just the one wheel closest to you, and that was plenty. We were really lucky in that our design and engineering team made this really amazing physics-based driving model that was built upon from Mafia 2. And so we had access to a huge wealth of information. I won't go through every single one in detail, but the couple that I'll call out was we were able to do the Jake brake on the truck by knowing the engine load, the clutch position, and the angle if the truck was only pointing its nose downhill. And so that allowed us to do everything we wanted to inside of Wwise. Tire rotational speed was a really important thing too. If the wheel was spinning at a slower rotational speed relative to what it should be going for the vehicle speed, then we knew we were skidding to a halt. If it was running at a higher rotational speed, we knew we were doing a burnout. And of course, if it was drifting sideways, we had that information as well. So what you can see there is a series of blend containers nested inside of other blend containers, and using some RTPCs, we were able to build all of our drifting and burnouts and tire temperature simulation all inside of Wwise. And then in closing, I'd like to show you just a really quick clip of kind of everything culminated together. This is kind of the best driving experience that we strived for and what we thought we could deliver in Mafia 3, so I hope you enjoy this. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to get up here, particularly early on a Friday morning. Hope you enjoyed that. I hope you kind of learned something about the process of recording cars. We have a little bit of time left, so if anyone would like to ask questions, feel free to come up to the microphone up in front.
Hi, great talk.
Thank you.
I was just curious about with the tire recording session, what was the tape for around the, around the tires? It appeared to be tape.
There was two purposes. One was to tape the mic cables down, and the other was just as stone protection. The technician we worked with, particularly it's blue painter's tape, which doesn't leave any kind of glued residue behind, because we were conscious of not damaging the paint. But he basically said, if we tape up certain areas of the car, this is where all the stone chips are going to come from, this is where all the dirt's going to get kicked up. So particularly when we recorded on the gravel road, that was something we wanted to do to just protect the car. But it also served as taping down mic cables.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
When recording these cars on a Dynapack, for instance, did you have to have hub adapters made for some of the cars for like the bolt patterns to get them to match up?
So the workshop had standard 4 and 5 bolt patterns, and those adapters are adjustable for certain widths.
Yeah.
We did have a special Volkswagen adapter made, but it turned out we weren't permitted to use Volkswagen recordings, so we had to throw that away.
Right.
There are some brands out there that trademark their sound, so we learned over time there were certain cars we couldn't use. And then it was really just that McLaren that we had the special adapter made. But everything else, we searched for cars that fit that particular bolt pattern, and then sometimes we would unfortunately have to turn down cars if they weren't going to fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a question as well.
Hi.
So you said that you recorded 30 different vehicles, but you used 90 in the game. Were you like mixing and matching sounds from different recordings?
A little bit. Mostly it was just we just shared those recordings across the 90.
So you just had like 30 like archetypes for vehicles, and then
Pretty much, yeah. And then we would choose what we thought sounded the best or most appropriate based on, the designers were tweaking what the performance of that car was going, or virtual performance of that car was going to be, so we would choose what we thought sounded the best.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks.
During the recording session out on the track, what did you use in terms of multi-track and like 64 gigabyte cards? You just press record and just record all day long, or?
For the tires?
Yeah.
We had a Sound Devices 788T, and we had one person sitting in the passenger seat recording. So we would use radio communication to talk back to our producer and tell her this is what maneuvers we're about to do next, and then she would note that, and we'd talk time code back and forth across the radio. And if we were forgetting something, she would say, look, on your list you've got these 3 more things you haven't done yet. And so we were just communicating over radio that way. The radio was really mainly meant to be a safety feature. If something caught on fire or fell off, we would have someone tell us. But it also served as a way to kind of prompt us of what to do for whoever was sitting in the car itself. Yeah. Cool, well thank you everyone for coming. Enjoy the rest of your GDC. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here.